What if I told you that the biggest lie you've been telling yourself isn't about your capabilities, your circumstances, or even your past failures, but about a single word that's been quietly sabotaging your dreams for years? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Right now, as you're watching this video, there's a voice inside your head. You know the one I'm talking about. It's the voice that whispers, "Not yet," every time you think about starting that business, having that difficult conversation, or making that life-changing decision. It sounds so reasonable, so protective, even wise. It tells you to wait until you have more money, more experience, more certainty. It convinces you that being ready is a prerequisite for action. Has this ever happened to you? You get excited about a goal, you can practically taste the success, but then that voice kicks in. You're not ready yet. You need more time. What if you fail? What if people judge you? And just like that, your momentum dies, your excitement fades, and you find yourself back where you started, waiting for some magical moment when everything will finally align. Here's what most people don't realize. That voice of hesitation is the most expensive advisor you'll ever listen to. Every day you spend waiting for the perfect moment, the world moves forward without your unique contribution. Every delay builds invisible walls around your potential, creating an ever-widening gap between your current reality and your dreams. But what you're about to discover might surprise you. The people who seem to have it all together, who appear confident and decisive, who create extraordinary results in their lives, they're not operating from some mystical state of readiness. They've simply understood a fundamental truth that changes everything. Readiness isn't a feeling that descends upon you like divine inspiration. It's a decision. It's an internal switch you consciously flip when you choose to move forward despite uncertainty. Think about it. When did you last wait to feel completely ready before doing something difficult? When you learned to drive, were you ready for your first time behind the wheel? When you started your first job, did you feel fully prepared for every challenge? When you fell in love, did you wait until you were emotionally perfect? Of course not. You acted, you learned, you adapted, and you grew through the process. The most successful people in the world don't wait for confidence to knock on their door. They create confidence through action. They understand that the version of themselves who feels ready doesn't exist yet, and never will, until they start moving. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will fundamentally shift how you approach every goal, every dream, every aspiration you've been putting off. See, there's a profound difference between those who achieve their dreams and those who simply dream about achieving them. It's not talent, luck, or even circumstances. It's the willingness to reject the lie of readiness and embrace something far more powerful. The courage to begin before you feel prepared. The truth is, every moment you spend waiting for readiness is a moment stolen from your future self. But there's a way to reclaim that time, that energy, that potential. There's a way to flip that internal switch and start becoming the person you've always known you could be. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's a hidden truth about human transformation that most people never discover. Every single person walking this earth carries within them two distinct versions of themselves, and the tension between these two identities is what creates most of the frustration, anxiety, and stagnation you experience in your daily life. Picture this for a moment. There's the current version of you, the one shaped by past experiences, familiar routines, and comfortable patterns. This version knows exactly how to navigate your existing reality, because it's been rehearsing the same behaviors for years. Then there's this other version, the one that emerges in quiet moments when you close your eyes and imagine what your life could look like. This future self is confident where you feel uncertain, disciplined where you struggle with consistency, and bold where you tend to hesitate. The fascinating thing about this future version is that it's not some fantasy or wishful thinking. It's actually a signal, a glimpse of what's possible when you stop aligning with your limitations and start aligning with your potential. But here's where most people get trapped. They treat this future self like a distant destination they'll somehow arrive at one day, rather than recognizing it as an identity they can step into right now. This creates what I call the identity gap, and it shows up everywhere in your life. You say you want to be a leader, but you hesitate to speak up in meetings. You claim you want financial freedom, but you make impulsive spending decisions. You desire confidence, but your internal dialogue is still rooted in self-doubt. This isn't because you're broken or lacking willpower. It's because you're trying to reach a new level of life with the mindset and habits of your previous self. What most people don't realize is that your future self isn't some magical transformation waiting to happen. That confident leader, that disciplined creator, that courageous entrepreneur you admire so much, they already exist within you right now. They're not outside of you. They're not in some distant future. They're simply not in control yet. For years, fear, insecurity, and old programming have been running the show, making the decisions, shaping your responses to life's challenges. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Every time you act in alignment with who you want to become, rather than who you've been conditioned to be, you're essentially giving your future self more control. Each aligned decision is like a vote cast in the election of your identity. And when those votes start accumulating, something remarkable happens. The gap between who you are and who you're becoming begins to close, not through some dramatic overnight transformation, but through the quiet power of consistent, intentional choices. The journey from your current self to your future self isn't about becoming someone entirely different. It's about releasing the layers of conditioning that have kept your authentic potential suppressed. It's about recognizing that the person you admire, the one living the life you want, isn't a stranger you need to become. They're already you, waiting for permission to emerge. This shift in perspective changes everything about how you approach growth, decisions, and daily actions. Instead of waiting to feel different before acting different, you start acting different to become different. Write in the comments, "I can feel my future self," if this resonates with your journey right now. The most profound revelation about transformation is that it doesn't happen through grand gestures or dramatic life overhauls. It happens through something so subtle that most people completely overlook it. The microscopic decisions you make every single day. Right now, as you go through your daily routine, you're constantly casting votes in the most important election of your life, the election of your identity. Think about it this way. When you choose to scroll through social media instead of reading that book you bought months ago, you're voting. When you speak to yourself with criticism rather than encouragement after making a mistake, you're voting. When you spend money impulsively instead of saving for that goal you claim is important, you're voting. When you invest your evening in mindless entertainment rather than learning a new skill, you're voting. Each of these choices might seem insignificant in the moment, but they're actually powerful declarations of who you are and who you're becoming. The fascinating thing about this internal voting system is that it operates completely under the radar of your conscious awareness. You don't wake up and think, "Today I'm going to vote for mediocrity," or "I choose to reinforce my old patterns." These votes happen automatically, quietly, consistently, until one day you look at your life and wonder why nothing has changed despite all your good intentions and positive thinking. Here's where most people get trapped in a dangerous illusion. They believe that not making a decision is somehow neutral, that hesitation and inaction keep them in a safe middle ground. But there's a hidden truth behind this mindset that completely shifts the game once you understand it. When you choose not to act, when you postpone that important conversation, when you delay starting that project, when you avoid making that difficult but necessary change, you're not staying neutral. You're actively voting for your current circumstances to remain exactly as they are. Every moment of hesitation is actually a silent endorsement for the status quo to stay in power. It's like showing up to an election and deliberately choosing not to vote, then being surprised when the outcome doesn't align with what you claim to want. Your inaction isn't protecting you from failure or disappointment. It's ensuring that your present reality continues to dominate your future possibilities. This realization can be both confronting and liberating. Confronting because it forces you to acknowledge your own role in creating your current situation. Liberating because it means you have far more control over your transformation than you ever imagined. You don't need to wait for perfect conditions, ideal timing, or external permission to start shifting the balance of your identity. You can begin right now, with your very next decision. The beautiful thing about understanding this voting system is that it completely changes how you view seemingly ordinary moments. That choice between hitting snooze or getting up becomes a vote for discipline or procrastination. That decision to have a difficult conversation or avoid it becomes a vote for courage or comfort. That moment when you choose creation over consumption becomes a vote for growth or stagnation. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to vote differently," if you're starting to see how powerful your daily choices really are. What strikes me most about studying highly successful people is that they all share one fascinating characteristic that completely contradicts what most of us have been taught about achievement. The version of themselves who has everything they desire, who lives the life they once only dreamed about, operates from a completely different set of rules than the rest of us. They don't pause for external validation before making important moves. They don't wait for ideal conditions to align perfectly. They don't seek permission from others to pursue their vision. This future version of themselves moves forward while feeling uncertain, takes action when no one's watching, and creates massive shifts through something most people overlook: consistent alignment with their chosen identity, regardless of whether anyone else understands or approves. They've somehow broken free from the invisible chains that keep most people trapped in cycles of hesitation and self-doubt. But here's the revelation that changes everything about how you approach your own transformation. The version of yourself who feels completely prepared, confident, and ready doesn't exist somewhere in the future waiting for you to find them. They don't magically appear one day when you've accumulated enough knowledge, experience, or external validation. That ready version of you emerges through action, through movement, through the very process of doing the things you think you need to feel ready for first. Think about this for a moment. You don't gain physical strength by thinking about lifting weights, visualizing perfect form, or reading fitness magazines. You build muscle by actually putting resistance against your body, by moving weight, by showing up at the gym even when you don't feel motivated. The strength develops through the process, not before it. Confidence works exactly the same way, but most people have this backwards in their minds. They believe confidence is a prerequisite for action, when in reality, confidence is the byproduct of action. Every time you show up despite feeling uncertain, every time you take a step forward without knowing exactly where it leads, every time you act in alignment with your future self rather than your current comfort level, you're literally building the readiness you thought you needed to have first. This is why waiting for the right moment or the perfect conditions is such a trap. You're essentially waiting for something that can only be created through the very action you're postponing. It's like standing at the edge of a swimming pool, waiting to feel like a swimmer before you jump in. The swimmer identity is forged in the water, not on the deck. The most powerful people understand this paradox intuitively. They've learned that the feelings they thought they needed to possess before starting, certainty, composure, validation, are actually generated through motion, through engagement, through the friction of pushing against their own resistance. Write in the comments, "Motion creates the magic," if you're beginning to see how action creates the very readiness you've been waiting for. This brings me to another misconception that keeps people stuck in endless loops of preparation and analysis. There's this widespread belief that clarity should come first, that you need to have a crystal clear vision of your path before you take the first step. People spend months, even years, trying to think their way into perfect understanding of their direction, analyzing every possible outcome, researching every potential obstacle, waiting for that moment when the fog of uncertainty finally lifts. But here's the hidden truth about clarity that most people never discover. You cannot think your way into clear vision about your path. All the planning, journaling, and strategic thinking in the world will never replace the clarity you receive from actually engaging with the process itself. Vision doesn't sharpen through meditation or endless reflection. It sharpens through movement, through action, through the real-time feedback you get when you're actively participating in your own transformation. The lessons you desperately want, the intuitive guidance you're hoping to develop, the deep understanding of your direction, all of it becomes available only when you're in motion. Until then, everything remains theoretical, abstract, disconnected from the reality of your actual experience. It's like trying to learn to drive by reading the manual over and over again without ever getting behind the wheel. What I've observed in my own journey and in watching others transform their lives is that clarity isn't the starting line. It's almost always the byproduct of engagement. The people who seem to have such clear direction didn't start with that clarity. They developed it through the process of taking imperfect action, gathering feedback, adjusting their approach, and moving forward again. Think about fog for a moment. When you're driving through heavy fog, you don't sit on the side of the road waiting for perfect visibility. You move forward carefully, using your headlights to see just far enough ahead to take the next safe step. And as you continue driving, the fog doesn't magically disappear all at once, but your path becomes clearer simply because you're moving through it. You can see where you need to go next, even if you can't see the entire destination. This is exactly how life works. Waiting for uncertainty to disappear before taking action is like waiting for that fog to completely clear before you continue your journey. It's not going to happen. Clarity doesn't emerge while you stand still, paralyzed by the unknown. It reveals itself as you move forward, as you take those uncertain steps, as you engage with the process despite not having all the answers. The path becomes visible precisely because you're walking it, not because you spent more time staring at maps from a distance. Every step forward provides new information, new perspectives, new possibilities that were completely invisible when you were standing at the starting point. Write in the comments, "I'm walking through the fog," if you're ready to stop waiting for perfect clarity before you begin moving forward. This leads me to one of the most misunderstood concepts in personal development: confidence. Most people treat confidence like it's some kind of personality trait you're either born with or not, something magical that certain people just naturally possess. They think it comes from positive thinking, daily affirmations, or hoping really hard that things will work out. But real confidence, the kind that actually transforms your life and changes how you show up in the world, works completely differently. True confidence isn't built on hope or wishful thinking. It's built on evidence, hard, tangible proof that you can rely on yourself when it matters most. Every single time you follow through on a commitment you make to yourself, every moment you handle discomfort instead of running from it, every instance where you show up despite feeling afraid or uncertain, you're creating concrete evidence that builds what I call unshakable self-trust. The fascinating thing about this evidence-based confidence is that it's completely immune to external circumstances. It doesn't depend on other people's approval, perfect conditions, or even successful outcomes. It's rooted in something much deeper: your relationship with yourself and your track record of personal integrity. But here's where most people unknowingly sabotage their own confidence without even realizing it. They focus so much on big external achievements and public successes that they completely overlook the small internal commitments that actually build the foundation of self-trust. When you tell yourself you'll wake up early tomorrow but hit snooze instead, you're not just losing an hour of sleep, you're casting a vote against your own reliability. When you promise yourself you'll finally start that creative project but choose Netflix instead, you're not just procrastinating, you're teaching your subconscious mind that your word doesn't carry weight. These broken internal commitments erode confidence far more than external failures ever could, because when you fail at something in the outside world, you can always point to circumstances, other people, or factors beyond your control. But when you consistently break promises to yourself, there's nowhere to hide. Your inner critic has all the ammunition it needs to convince you that you can't be trusted with your own dreams. The most powerful revelation is that self-trust is built in those quiet moments when no one else is watching, when there's no external accountability, when it would be so easy to choose comfort over commitment. The decision to get up when your alarm goes off instead of negotiating with yourself for 5 more minutes. The choice to have that difficult conversation instead of avoiding it for another week. The discipline to work on your goals when you don't feel motivated rather than waiting for inspiration to strike. These seemingly insignificant moments are actually the building blocks of unshakable confidence. They're the evidence your mind needs to believe that you are someone who can be counted on, especially by yourself. Write in the comments, "I keep my word to myself," if you're ready to start building real confidence through daily evidence rather than positive thinking. Now, I want to explore something that most people never fully grasp until it's too late: the true cost of delay. There's a silent tax that gets charged every single time you postpone a decision, delay taking action, or defer pursuing a dream that matters to you. This isn't just about lost time, though. That's certainly part of it. It's about something far more insidious and damaging to your long-term potential. Every day you spend waiting for the right moment or the perfect conditions, you're paying a compound interest on your own hesitation. Lost momentum that could have been building, drained energy that could have been channeling into creation, missed opportunities that don't wait around for you to feel ready. The brutal truth is that while you're sitting there analyzing, planning, and convincing yourself that you're being wise and strategic, life is moving forward without you. What's particularly dangerous about this pattern is how it distorts your perception over time. The longer you delay, the more you start to confuse hesitation with wisdom. You begin to tell yourself stories about why waiting is actually the smart choice, why being cautious is mature and responsible. But deep down, in the quiet moments when you're honest with yourself, you know the difference between genuine strategic thinking and fear-based procrastination. This internal conflict creates something that most people don't recognize as connected to their delay patterns: a constant undercurrent of anxiety and self-doubt. When you know you should act but don't, when you sense there's something important you're avoiding, your inner world becomes cluttered with tension. This isn't just psychological, it's physical. It shows up in your sleep quality, your energy levels, your creative capacity. There's a part of you that's always slightly on edge, always carrying the weight of undone actions. Nothing erodes self-trust faster than consistently holding yourself back from taking necessary action. Each time you choose comfort over courage, each time you pick safety over growth, each time you select familiar patterns over necessary change, you're sending a message to your subconscious mind that you can't be trusted with your own dreams and aspirations. The most heartbreaking part about this pattern is that people often don't realize how much it's costing them until years have passed. They wake up one day and wonder why they feel stuck, why their confidence has diminished, why their dreams feel more distant than ever. The answer usually isn't that they lacked ability or opportunity. It's that they paid the compound cost of delay for so long that the gap between where they are and where they want to be feels insurmountable. But here's what I've discovered about breaking free from this costly cycle of postponement and hesitation. Write in the comments, "No more delay," if you're ready to stop paying the hidden tax of postponement and start reclaiming your momentum. The breakthrough happens when you understand that transformation isn't about waiting to become someone different. It's about embodying the behaviors, decisions, and energy of your future self right now, even when it feels completely unnatural. This concept often gets misunderstood as "fake it till you make it," but that's not what I'm talking about. This isn't about pretending or putting on a performance for others. This is about practicing being the person you're becoming until that identity becomes your new reality. When you consistently act as if you already are the version of yourself who has achieved what you want, something fascinating happens in your brain. You literally begin to rewire your internal identity to match that higher standard. Your neural pathways start adapting to support these new patterns of thinking and behaving. What once felt forced and artificial gradually becomes natural and automatic. But here's where most people get tripped up and abandon this powerful approach. The moment they start acting outside their familiar patterns, everything feels wrong. It's awkward, uncomfortable, sometimes even embarrassing. They take this discomfort as a sign that they're being inauthentic or that this approach isn't working for them, so they retreat back to their comfortable old behaviors, convinced that this method doesn't suit their personality. This is a critical misunderstanding of how growth actually works. The awkwardness you feel when you start behaving differently isn't evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's actually proof that you're doing something right. You're literally moving against years of conditioning, stepping outside patterns you've rehearsed thousands of times, challenging the invisible boundaries you've constructed around your identity. Think about the first time you tried to write with your non-dominant hand, or when you attempted to learn a new language, or when you started exercising after months of being sedentary. Everything felt clunky, unnatural, difficult. That discomfort wasn't telling you to quit. It was telling you that you were in unfamiliar territory where real transformation lives. The same principle applies to identity transformation. When you start speaking up in meetings, like the confident leader you want to become, when you begin making decisions like the successful entrepreneur you're working toward, when you start treating your time and energy like the high achiever you're developing into, it's going to feel strange at first. You're essentially learning to operate from a new identity, and like any skill, it requires practice and patience. The most successful people I've studied understand that discomfort isn't a warning sign to retreat. It's a compass, pointing toward growth. They've learned to interpret that feeling of awkwardness as confirmation that they're on the edge of a breakthrough, pushing against the very limitations that have kept them stuck. Write in the comments, "Growth feels uncomfortable," if you're starting to recognize that the awkwardness of change is actually a sign you're moving in the right direction. This brings me to one of the most liberating revelations about fear that completely changes how you navigate challenging moments in your transformation journey. Most people have been conditioned to treat fear as a warning system, a red alert telling them to stop, retreat, or find a safer path. But what if I told you that fear is actually one of your most reliable compasses, pointing you directly toward the very experiences that will unlock your next level of growth? When you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, that voice in your head screaming, "Danger," what's really happening is that you're approaching the edge of an old pattern, standing at the threshold of new territory where real transformation lives. Fear doesn't show up when you're repeating comfortable behaviors or staying within familiar boundaries. It emerges precisely when you're about to break through limitations that have kept you playing small. The most successful people I've observed have learned to interpret fear completely differently than the average person. Instead of seeing it as a stop sign, they recognize it as a signal, pointing toward what matters most to them. They understand that the things that scare them the most are often the exact experiences that will create the biggest positive shifts in their lives. This doesn't mean being reckless or ignoring genuine danger. It means developing the wisdom to distinguish between fear that's protecting you from real harm and fear that's protecting you from growth. The fear of having an important conversation, starting that business, sharing your creative work, or stepping into leadership, these aren't warnings about physical danger. They're indicators that you're approaching something meaningful enough to challenge your current identity. Real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about refusing to let fear make your decisions for you. It's about feeling the fear fully and then choosing your direction based on your values and vision rather than your comfort level. This shift in perspective transforms fear from an enemy into an ally, from a barrier into a bridge. But here's what gives me the most confidence in your ability to move through fear. You've already done it countless times before. The strength, resilience, and adaptability that your future requires isn't something you need to develop from scratch. It already exists within you, proven through every challenge you've overcome, every setback you've recovered from, every moment you thought would break you, but didn't. Think about your track record for a moment. You've survived relationship endings that felt like the world was collapsing. You've navigated career transitions that seemed impossible at the time. You've moved through loss, disappointment, rejection, failure, and uncertainty more times than you can count. Fear didn't permanently stop you then, so why should it have the power to stop you now? Write in the comments, "Fear is my compass," if you're ready to start treating fear as guidance toward your growth, rather than a reason to retreat. This understanding of fear as guidance rather than limitation naturally leads us to examine what actually creates lasting transformation in your life. Because while courage gets you started and helps you push through resistance, it's what you do consistently, day after day, That determines whether your breakthrough becomes a permanent shift or just a temporary peak experience. Your future isn't built from vision alone, though vision is certainly important. It's not constructed from motivational moments, inspiring content, or even profound realizations about your potential. Your future identity is shaped by something far more mundane and far more powerful. What you do every single day when no one's watching, when the excitement has worn off, when motivation has left the building. This is where most people get tripped up in their transformation journey. They rely heavily on motivation to carry them through, not realizing that motivation is like a sugar rush, intense and energizing in the moment, but completely unreliable for sustained progress. Motivation may get you started, may give you that initial burst of energy to begin acting differently, but it's your habits, those automatic behaviors you repeat without thinking, that create lasting change. The brutal truth is that if your daily behaviors contradict your desired identity, you'll keep running in circles no matter how clear your vision or how strong your initial motivation. You can attend all the seminars, read all the books, and set all the goals you want, but if your daily routine doesn't align with the person you're trying to become, you'll find yourself stuck in the same patterns year after year. But here's what's fascinating about how real transformation actually happens. It's not through massive overnight changes or dramatic life overhauls, though those make for better stories. Those approaches usually fail because they're unsustainable, and they shock your system into resistance. What actually works is something much more subtle but infinitely more powerful. Small, sustainable adjustments that gradually align your daily reality with your future vision. Waking up 30 minutes earlier to invest in yourself before the world demands your attention. Spending 10 minutes on your creative work before checking social media. Saying no to distractions that used to consume your evenings. Holding boundaries that protect your energy and time. These might seem like tiny adjustments, almost insignificant in the moment, but they're actually profound identity declarations. Each small habit is you casting a vote for the type of person you're becoming. When you consistently choose to act in alignment with your future self, even in these seemingly minor ways, you're literally rewiring your brain's understanding of who you are. Write in the comments, small steps, big changes, if you're recognizing that transformation happens through daily consistency, rather than dramatic moments. What most people underestimate in their transformation journey is how powerfully their environment shapes their identity, often in ways they're completely unconscious of. No matter how disciplined you become with your daily habits, no matter how committed you are to change, if you remain immersed in the same conditions that shaped the old version of yourself, you'll find yourself fighting an uphill battle that's much harder than it needs to be. Your surroundings are constantly communicating with you, sending subtle but persistent messages about what's possible, what's normal, what's expected of someone like you. The people you spend time with, the conversations that fill your days, the physical spaces you inhabit, the content you consume, all of it either reinforces your evolution toward your future self or quietly pulls you back into familiar patterns that keep you exactly where you've always been. This isn't about making dramatic changes like moving to a different city or cutting everyone out of your life. It's about becoming intentional with the inputs that are shaping your mindset and your sense of what's possible. Most people are incredibly passive about this. They allow whatever information, energy, and influence that happens to cross their path throughout the day to shape their internal world, never realizing how much control they actually have over this process. Think about your digital environment for a moment. What's the first thing you see when you wake up and check your phone? What kind of content fills your social media feeds? What podcasts are you listening to during your commute? What books are sitting on your nightstand? These inputs might seem neutral or even entertaining, but they're actually programming your subconscious mind with ideas about what's possible for someone like you. If you're constantly consuming content that reinforces limitation, scarcity, complaints, or mediocrity, that becomes the background soundtrack of your internal dialogue. But when you consciously curate inputs that reflect growth, possibility, success, and the mindset of your future self, you start to internalize those standards without even trying. The same principle applies to your physical environment. When your space is cluttered, chaotic, or filled with reminders of who you used to be rather than who you're becoming, it's constantly sending signals to your brain that reflect stagnation rather than progress. But when you intentionally design your environment to support your vision, when you surround yourself with visual reminders of your goals and the identity you're building, you make it much easier to stay aligned with your transformation. Even more powerful is the social dimension of your environment. The conversations you have regularly, the people whose energy you absorb, the social dynamics you participate in. These shape your sense of what's normal and what's possible, more than almost anything else. Write in the comments, environment shapes everything, if you're starting to see how your surroundings might be supporting or sabotaging your transformation without you even realizing it. Now, I want to explore how this environmental awareness connects to one of the most subtle but destructive patterns that keeps people trapped in cycles of hesitation and self-doubt. Because once you start becoming more intentional about your surroundings, you begin to notice something that most people never consciously recognize: how much of their decision-making is actually driven by seeking approval and validation from others rather than alignment with their own inner truth. This need for external validation is one of those invisible forces that quietly sabotages transformation in ways most people never connect the dots on. You start making progress, building momentum, stepping into your future identity, but then the moment someone questions your path or expresses doubt about your direction, everything starts to wobble. Your confidence shakes, your certainty wavers, and suddenly you find yourself second-guessing decisions that felt absolutely right just moments before. What's happening in these moments is that you've unconsciously built your identity on a foundation that's completely outside your control: other people's opinions. External validation feels good when it comes, absolutely. It's energizing to receive praise, recognition, or approval for your choices and progress. But here's the trap that most people fall into without realizing it. External validation is temporary, inconsistent, and completely conditional on factors you can't predict or control. The person who celebrated your bold move last week might question it this week. The friend who encouraged your dreams might project their own fears onto your journey when their mood changes. The family member who seemed supportive might suddenly become critical when your growth makes them uncomfortable with their own stagnation. When your sense of worth and direction depends on these external reactions, you create a foundation that's inherently fragile. The moment someone questions your path, challenges your choices, or simply doesn't understand your vision, your entire belief system starts to crumble. This is why so many people get stuck in cycles of starting and stopping, making progress only to retreat when they encounter disapproval or lack of support from others. But true power, the kind that sustains you through challenges and carries you toward your vision regardless of external circumstances, comes from something completely different: self-directed certainty. When you learn to live in integrity with your own values and vision, when your choices emerge from internal alignment rather than external expectation, you become your own source of validation. This doesn't mean becoming stubborn or ignoring valuable feedback. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between input that genuinely serves your growth and opinion that's simply a reflection of someone else's limitations or fears. Write in the comments, "I validate myself," if you're ready to stop building your confidence on the shifting foundation of other people's approval. This shift towards self-directed certainty naturally brings us to one of the most counterintuitive aspects of creating lasting transformation: the relationship between commitment and backup plans. Most people believe that having a safety net is smart, responsible, even mature. They keep one foot in their current situation while testing the waters of change, thinking this approach protects them from potential failure or disappointment. But here's what I've discovered through studying people who create extraordinary change in their lives. As long as you're holding on to Plan B, you're never fully giving yourself to Plan A. Those backup plans that feel so comforting and rational are actually functioning as psychological escape routes that drain your urgency, soften your edge, and dilute the very energy you need to push through the inevitable challenges that come with real transformation. When you know there's always something to fall back on, When you've carefully preserved an exit strategy, your subconscious mind interprets this as evidence that failure is not only possible but expected. You're essentially telling yourself that your primary path probably won't work out, so you better keep other options warm just in case. This mindset completely changes how you show up to the process of change. Think about it this way. If you knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back, that your current path was the only way forward, how would that change your level of commitment? How much harder would you push when faced with obstacles? How much more creative would you become when solving problems? How much less willing would you be to make excuses or accept mediocre effort from yourself? The truth is, keeping safety nets makes your current transformation feel optional rather than essential. When things get difficult, and they will, when you encounter setbacks or challenges that test your resolve, having that comfortable backup plan makes quitting easier to justify. You tell yourself it's not really quitting, it's just being practical, returning to something more stable and predictable. But when you burn the backup plan, when you fully commit without parachutes, something fundamental shifts in how you operate. You stop wasting mental energy considering other options and start channeling all that focus into making your chosen path work. You push harder because you have to. You problem solve faster because there's no alternative. You take full responsibility for your results instead of making excuses because there's nowhere else to place the blame. This level of commitment unlocks a kind of resourcefulness and determination that's simply not accessible when you're hedging your bets. It's the difference between someone who's testing the waters and someone who's all in. Write in the comments, all in, no backup, if you're ready to stop diluting your commitment with safety nets and start showing up with the full force of your potential. This level of total commitment naturally leads us to examine what sustains that intensity over time, because burning the backup plan is just the beginning. The real transformation happens in what you do consistently after that initial moment of commitment, in how you honor that decision day after day, when the excitement fades and the work becomes routine. This is where most people completely misunderstand the role of discipline in transformation. They treat discipline like it's some form of punishment, a rigid system of forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. But true discipline, the kind that actually creates lasting change, has nothing to do with force or deprivation. It's actually one of the purest forms of self-respect you can practice. When you choose to act in alignment with your highest standards, when you follow through on commitments you make to yourself, when you treat your time and energy as valuable resources worth protecting, you're not being hard on yourself. You're showing profound respect for your future, your goals, and your potential. Every disciplined choice is a declaration that you matter, that your vision is worth pursuing, and that you're worthy of the intentional life you're building. This reframe changes everything about how discipline feels in your daily experience. Instead of it being something you have to force yourself through, it becomes something you choose because you respect yourself too much to settle for less. You wake up early not because you're punishing yourself, but because you honor your goals enough to give them your best energy. You say no to distractions, not because you're depriving yourself, but because you value your vision more than temporary entertainment. What's fascinating about this approach to discipline is that it builds something far more powerful than just good habits. It builds unshakable identity. Each time you follow through on a commitment to yourself, each moment you choose alignment over convenience, you're sending a clear message to your subconscious mind about who you are and what you stand for. This is why consistency builds identity more powerfully than intensity ever could. You might have moments of incredible motivation where you work for hours, make dramatic changes, or push yourself beyond normal limits. But those intense bursts, while valuable, don't reshape your sense of self the way steady, repeated actions do. When you show up consistently, even when you don't feel like it, even when the progress seems slow, you become someone who can be trusted by others, but more importantly, by yourself. This self-trust is what ultimately frees you from dependence on motivation or external circumstances. When you've built enough evidence through consistent action that you are someone who follows through, you no longer need to feel inspired to take action. You act from who you are, not from how you feel in the moment. Write in the comments, Discipline equals freedom. If you're beginning to see how consistent self-respect through action creates the ultimate form of personal liberation. This understanding of how consistency shapes identity brings us to one of the most profound aspects of transformation that most people never address directly: the hidden stories that have been running your life from behind the scenes. Because while you're building new habits and practicing discipline, there's often an invisible narrative playing in the background that either supports your growth or quietly sabotages every effort you make. Every person carries within them a collection of internal stories about their capabilities, their worth, and what they're allowed to have in life. These narratives didn't appear out of nowhere. They were carefully constructed over years through childhood experiences, past failures, societal programming, and the conclusions you drew about yourself during difficult moments. Some of these stories might sound like, "I'm not good with money, I always mess things up when it matters," or "I'm just not the type of person who succeeds at this." The insidious thing about these limiting narratives is that they feel like facts rather than interpretations. They've been with you so long, repeated so many times in your internal dialogue, that you've stopped questioning their validity. But here's what changes everything once you recognize it. These stories are not permanent truths about who you are. They're simply explanations you've accepted about your past experiences. And like any explanation, they can be updated, revised, or completely rewritten. Your past certainly explains your current patterns. The experiences you've had, the conclusions you drew, the coping mechanisms you developed, all of these created the neural pathways that influence how you think and behave today. But here's the critical distinction that most people miss. While your past explains your patterns, it doesn't excuse your future. You are not trapped by what happened to you or the stories you've been telling yourself about those experiences. The breakthrough happens when you realize that changing your story literally changes your identity. Instead of saying, "I always mess things up," what if you said, "That experience taught me valuable lessons about resilience and problem solving"? Rather than, "I'm not disciplined," what if you framed it as, "I haven't practiced discipline consistently yet, but I'm learning"? These aren't just positive thinking exercises. They're fundamental rewrites of your internal operating system. When you shift from closed narratives that limit possibility to open narratives that create space for growth, you literally change the framework through which you interpret challenges, setbacks, and opportunities. New stories open doors instead of closing them. They create pathways for action instead of justifications for inaction. Write in the comments, "Rewriting my story," if you're ready to stop letting old narratives dictate your future possibilities and start crafting empowering interpretations of your experiences. This process of rewriting your internal narrative creates the perfect foundation for what I consider to be the most practical aspect of transformation: immediate alignment. Because once you've updated the stories that were keeping you trapped in old patterns, you can start making real-time decisions that reflect your new identity rather than your historical limitations. Every single day, from the moment you wake up until you go to sleep, you're faced with countless choices that either align with who you want to become or reinforce the version of yourself you're trying to outgrow. Most people make these decisions unconsciously, on autopilot, guided by familiar patterns rather than intentional direction. But when you understand the power of immediate alignment, you start recognizing these moments as opportunities to collapse the gap between your intentions and your actions. This isn't about waiting for perfect conditions or ideal timing to start living differently. It's about recognizing that transformation happens in the present moment, through your very next decision. You don't need a complete life overhaul to begin aligning with your future self. You just need to start making choices that reflect your values and vision, starting right now. The beauty of this approach is that it transforms ordinary moments into powerful declarations of identity. If health truly matters to you, then choosing nourishing food for your next meal becomes a vote for the healthy person you're becoming. If creativity is important, then spending 10 minutes writing, drawing, or brainstorming today becomes evidence that you're someone who prioritizes their creative expression. If peace is valuable to you, then setting a boundary that protects your energy becomes proof that you respect yourself enough to guard what matters. These might seem like small actions, almost insignificant when viewed individually. But here's what most people don't understand about momentum. It's not built through grand gestures or dramatic changes. It's created in these micro moments when you consistently choose alignment over convenience, growth over comfort, your future self over your familiar patterns. Each aligned choice sends a signal to your subconscious mind about who you are and what you stand for. When these signals accumulate over time, they create an unstoppable forward momentum that makes transformation feel less like a struggle and more like a natural expression of who you've become. The key is recognizing that every choice is either moving you closer to your vision or further from it. There's no neutral ground. Even the decision to delay, to wait for better circumstances, to choose comfort over growth. These are active choices that reinforce your current reality. Write in the comments, every choice matters, if you're starting to see how your daily decisions are actually building the life you'll be living tomorrow. This understanding of how every choice shapes your trajectory brings me to what might be the most liberating revelation in this entire journey of transformation. Everything you're seeking, everything you think you need to become the person you envision, already exists within you right now. I know that might sound like another feel-good platitude, but stay with me because this insight has the power to completely shift how you approach your growth. We live in a world that constantly tells you to seek the answer outside yourself. There's always another book to read, another course to take, another expert to follow, another strategy to implement. And while external learning has its place, this endless seeking often becomes a sophisticated form of procrastination that keeps you from accessing the wisdom and capability that already lives within you. Your instincts haven't disappeared, even though it might feel like they have. They've just gone quiet from disuse, overshadowed by years of being told to look everywhere except inward for guidance. Your inner wisdom hasn't vanished, it's just been drowned out by the noise of constant comparison, endless consumption of other people's opinions, and the persistent self-doubt that comes from outsourcing your authority to external sources. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most aligned, most powerful, most certain about your direction. I guarantee those weren't moments when you were following someone else's blueprint or seeking permission from others. They were moments when you connected with something deeper within yourself, when you trusted your own knowing, when you acted from internal truth rather than external expectation, when you stopped searching for validation and authority outside yourself. Something profound shifts in how you move through the world. You stop being reactive to every opinion, every criticism, every well-meaning piece of advice that contradicts your inner guidance. You stop needing applause or approval to feel confident about your choices. You stop bouncing from one strategy to another, hoping that the next external solution will finally give you what you've been seeking. Real power, the kind that sustains you through challenges and carries you toward your vision regardless of external circumstances, comes from learning to trust your own guidance. This doesn't mean becoming stubborn or closed to feedback. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between input that genuinely serves your growth and noise that simply reflects other people's limitations, fears, or projections. The most successful and fulfilled people I've studied all share this common characteristic. They've learned to lead their lives from internal authority rather than external approval. Write in the comments, I trust my inner wisdom, if you're ready to stop seeking answers outside yourself and start accessing the guidance that's been there all along. This shift toward internal authority naturally reveals one of the most practical discoveries about sustainable transformation: the difference between relying on motivation and building momentum. Because once you stop waiting for external permission and start trusting your own guidance, you quickly realize that depending on how you feel to determine your actions is one of the most unreliable strategies you could possibly adopt. Motivation is inherently emotional and unstable. It comes and goes like weather patterns, influenced by your mood, energy levels, external circumstances, and countless variables you can't control. If you're waiting to feel inspired before you take action, you'll spend more time waiting than moving. This is why so many people get stuck in cycles of starting and stopping, making progress when they feel good and retreating when the emotional high wears off. But momentum operates on completely different principles. It's mechanical rather than emotional. Once you're in motion, staying in motion becomes exponentially easier than trying to start from stillness. This is basic physics applied to personal transformation. The hardest part of almost any meaningful change is overcoming the initial inertia, that first push against your own resistance. You won't always feel inspired to work on your goals, to stick to your new habits, to push through challenges when they arise. But when you've learned to act anyway, regardless of your emotional state, you build something far more powerful than motivation could ever provide. Unstoppable forward progress that becomes self-sustaining. This is where most people get the transformation process completely backwards. They think successful people are more motivated, more naturally disciplined, more inherently driven. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The most consistent people aren't the most motivated. They're the most committed to structure over emotion. They've created systems, routines, and non-negotiables that remove the guesswork from their daily decisions. They don't wake up each morning and debate whether they feel like working out, eating well, or focusing on their priorities. They've already decided, and their environment and habits support those decisions automatically. This approach completely eliminates the exhausting internal negotiations that drain so much energy from people who rely on willpower and motivation. When you have structure in place, when you've designed your life to support your goals rather than sabotage them, you stop needing to feel a certain way to do what needs to be done. Write in the comments, structure over feelings, if you're ready to stop letting your emotions dictate your actions and start building systems that support your transformation regardless of how you feel. This understanding of how structure supports consistency brings us to one of the most encouraging aspects of transformation, the compound effect of bold action. Because when you're no longer at the mercy of your emotions, when you've built systems that support forward movement regardless of how you feel, you can start taking the kind of consistent, courageous steps that create exponential change over time. Here's what most people don't understand about breakthrough moments. They're rarely the result of one massive action or decision. They're the culmination of dozens, sometimes hundreds of smaller bold choices that compound quietly in the background until they reach a tipping point that looks sudden from the outside, but was actually building momentum for months or years. One courageous decision might not change everything immediately, but it does something far more important. It sends a clear signal to your identity that you are someone who moves forward despite uncertainty. When you have that difficult conversation you've been avoiding, when you finally launch that project you've been perfecting, when you set that boundary you've been afraid to establish, you're not just accomplishing a task, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. And when these bold actions start stacking consistently, when you develop a pattern of choosing courage over comfort, growth over safety, your entire trajectory begins to shift toward outcomes that would have seemed impossible from your starting point. This is the hidden mathematics of transformation that most people never get to experience because they give up before the compound effect has time to work. The crucial thing to understand is that you might not see immediate change from any single bold action. The effects are often building beneath the surface, invisible to casual observation, but very real in their impact. Every email you send that stretches your comfort zone, every conversation you initiate that challenges the status quo, every boundary you set that protects your vision. These are all votes cast in the ongoing election of your identity. What makes this process so powerful is that it's cumulative rather than dramatic. You don't need to make one perfect decision that changes everything. You just need to keep making choices that reflect the person you're becoming, rather than the person you've been. Each vote strengthens your new identity, and with enough votes cast consistently over time, transformation doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. The people who create extraordinary results in their lives understand this compound principle intuitively. They don't wait for the perfect moment or the guaranteed outcome. They start where they are, with what they have, and they keep taking bold steps forward. Write in the comments, every action counts, if you're beginning to see how your small, courageous choices are building towards something much bigger than any individual moment. This awareness of how courageous actions compound over time brings us to the fundamental principle that governs all lasting transformation. You become what you practice daily, not what you do occasionally when you feel motivated, not what you accomplish during intense bursts of effort, but what you rehearse consistently when no one's watching and no external reward is immediately visible. Most people dramatically underestimate how much of who they are is the result of practice rather than personality. They look at someone who's confident and assume they were born that way, forgetting that confidence is actually the result of practicing courage repeatedly until it becomes second nature. They observe someone who's disciplined and think it's a natural trait, not recognizing that discipline is built through the daily practice of choosing alignment over comfort. If you practice hesitation, you become hesitant. If you practice courage, you become bold. If you practice making excuses, you become someone who struggles with accountability. If you practice following through, you become dependable and trustworthy, especially to yourself. Your identity isn't fixed, it's fluid, constantly being shaped by what you rehearse most consistently. This is both confronting and liberating. Confronting because it means you have to take responsibility for who you've become through your patterns of practice. Liberating because it means you're not trapped by your current identity. You can literally practice your way into becoming someone new. Now, I want to explore the most profound realization that emerges from understanding this practice principle. Success isn't some distant destination you arrive at when all the external pieces finally align. It's not a place you reach after you've accumulated enough achievements, recognition, or resources. Success, in its most authentic form, is who you choose to be right now, in this moment, when no one's watching and no external validation is guaranteed. Success is built through the daily decisions that reflect your highest self, rather than repeat your lowest patterns. It's embodied in how you respond to challenges, how you treat your commitments to yourself, how you show up when it would be easier to shrink back. It's not something you find out there in the world, it's something you become through the quiet, consistent practice of living in alignment with your values and vision. This means your future self isn't waiting for perfect conditions, complete readiness, or external permission to emerge. They're waiting for you to start acting like them today. Write in the comments, "I embody success now." If you understand that transformation isn't about reaching a destination, but about who you choose to become in each present moment. If you've made it this far in our conversation, something tells me you're not just casually consuming content. You're someone who's genuinely ready to step into the person you've always known you could become. That kind of commitment to your own growth, that willingness to sit with these ideas and really absorb them, that's exactly the mindset that creates real transformation. I create these videos because I believe deeply in the power of each person to rewrite their story, to stop waiting for permission, and to start embodying the life they truly want. If this message resonated with you, if these insights feel like pieces of a puzzle you've been trying to solve, then I'd love to have you join this community of people who are choosing growth over comfort, action over hesitation. Hit that subscribe button, because honestly, the conversations we have here are designed for people exactly like you. People who understand that transformation isn't a someday goal, but a right-now decision. The content I share is created with intention, focusing on the real work of becoming who you're meant to be. And if this video spoke to something deep within you, if you feel like this message was exactly what you needed to hear today, leave a comment saying, "This message was meant for me." I read every single comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your readiness for change, even in such a simple way. If you found value in what we explored together, tap that like button. It tells me you're connecting with this content, and it helps these ideas reach other people who might need to hear them just as much as you did. There's a video right here that takes this conversation even deeper, exploring exactly how to maintain this momentum when life gets challenging. Click and continue with me over there, because the journey of becoming who you're meant to be is just getting started.